All right, Erik, welcome officially to the Fit Father Project and Fit Mother Project podcast, my friend. We're super happy to have you here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on. And I really enjoy kind of spending some time before the podcast started, getting to know you a little bit better, and very thankful for the work you're doing.
I appreciate that. And I will say I'm also excited, even just from our pre-conversation, because we have a lot in common and we're going to have a deep conversation today. My intention is that everyone who listens to this podcast today is going to walk away with a greater understanding of stress, of how to create more resilience so we can meet the demands of our lives, and how using technologies that you've developed like AIM7 is going to help people harness the power of data, of wearable technology, to actually do actionable insights and make improvements. So I think, in my opinion, you're at the forefront of this. And as I mentioned in the intro, if anyone is inspired throughout the process of this conversation and wants to actually get plugged into the AIM7 software and technology that you do have, there's going to be links in the show notes. We have a special coupon code for Fit Father and Fit Mother. The code is FitFamily. You can check that out. So that being said, let's get into a little bit of your background, because I think it's fascinating, and you as a high performer yourself have done so much in this realm. Like, give us the abbreviated couple minute version of how you became the guy that was so into like stress performance and all this stuff.
Well, first of all, thank you. That's very complimentary. I think it came up from inadequacy. I was a good high school football player, went on to play at Texas A&M, but I was a walk-on, and we had this physiology lab attached to our weight room. This is back in the 90s. It was called the Needham Steed Laboratory. And I wanted to be a surgeon, and I'm looking over and I'm like, what's going on here? Like, these people are like taking blood and they got these like masks on their face. And I went to our head strength and conditioning coach, who's still a very big influence in my life. He's actually the head strength coach at the Detroit Lions right now. And he said, Erik, there's a science to training athletes. And that was it. Like, I was done. And I would bug them all the time. And, I'm playing with guys that a lot of them played in the NFL, won Super Bowls, and I could see the difference between me and them. I'm like, how do I close the gap? Mm-hmm. So I went to the University of Arkansas for a graduate school, got a master's in physiology. And while I'm there, I'm a graduate assistant strength and conditioning coach. And one day this coach walks in with these athletes and he's like, hey, would you like to train these sprinters? They had just come off on Olympic Games. It was Veronica Campbell-Brown and several others. So I ended up working with a number of Olympic gold medalists for almost 14 years.
Wow.
And I started traveling the world and seeing how other countries were developing athletes, and they were way ahead of us. Because in the United States, we have one of the greatest genetic populations for gene pools for athletes. Mm-hmm. It is what it is. You go to Australia, huge by land mass, they did not have a very big athlete population. Yeah. And so up until like 2000, they were terrible in the Olympic Games. Well, they decided to change things, and they built something called the Australian Institute of Sport. They brought the best in technology and biomechanics and physiology together. Long story short, they went from like 50th in the world in medal count to top 3. Okay. Just by leveraging a cohesive way of developing athletes. So my goal became, how do I bring that to the United States? My opportunity came in 2010 when I was at Florida State with the football staff. I went to Australia and I brought back athlete wearable tracking technology. So this is before the Apple Watch existed. Fitbit was barely a thing. We were the first people to ever track an athlete in game. And we had this huge problem. We had millions of data points, no idea how to use it. Mm-hmm. I ended up hiring a former NASA propulsion engineer to help me derive meaning from the data and organize it. Long story short, we were able to use that data and information. We figured out a way to make it actionable, which is the key. And we had an 88% reduction in injury. Our team won a championship.
Wow.
It opened a multi-billion-dollar market for sports wearables and data. So now every NFL game you've ever seen, every college football game, the championship's coming up on Monday, they all have these little devices on the back of their shoulder pads in college, and it's all Catapult. That's what I brought to the U.S. In the NFL, they have chips in the shoulder pads. But anyways, so my career went in that direction, got a PhD, studying sleep and stress resilience. And I really wanted to understand, how do we build this capacity for more physical and psychological stress, because that is the unlock for athletic performance, and it's really the unlock for longevity and thriving.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of the genesis of my career and how everything evolved. And now I'm, running AIM7 and trying to serve people just like you are.
That is honestly really cool story, really impressive. And I'm really grateful and excited that we can now bring that level of high performance athletic experience into our fit father and fit mother communities, where we have parents who also need to be able to perform, at their jobs with their families, and just escape these cycles where people do get burnout or overwhelmed, and then they fall back into some old default habits and patterns that don't really serve them and aren't actually addressing the root cause. So could we talk about what is a resilient human, and how does the nervous system play into this, and what is stress? Let's kind of get foundational and describe what performance actually looks like in us, and keep in mind the busy dads and moms over 40 who are listening to this when you describe it.
Yeah. So a good friend of mine, his name is Dr. Alex Arbach, and I highly recommend you have him on your show. Mm-hmm. He's the director of wellness and development for the Toronto Raptors. And he has a beautiful way of describing stress. He said, stress is our brain and our body preparing us to do something effortful. I think we demonize stress, but stress is really a generic system that mobilizes other systems in our brain and our body for action. It could be immunological, it could be psychological, it could be physical, it could be social. And so the nervous system, specifically our brain, is what determines what events are stressful. And when you experience uncomfortable thoughts, emotions, and feelings, or you are put into a position where I have to take action, there's just this generic response where you kind of get into this heightened state of arousal. You know what I'm talking about. Your heart rate begins to beat a little bit faster, respiration rate increases, blood is moved away from your digestive system to your working muscles. The autonomic nervous system goes from more of a parasympathetic, or this kind of rest and digest state, to more of a sympathetic state, which has nothing to do with sympathy. But really, it's kind of turning on these systems to make you alert, focused, and to take action. That is what the stress system globally does. There's other parts to this, like the HPA axis. We don't really have to get into all that, but just know this. The interesting thing about stress is it's a very generic response. And because of that, there are tools at our disposal that we can use to regulate stress. I would also say that, stress in and of itself is not bad. Think about this. If you want to get fit, you have to engage with exercise, which is a stress.
Yep.
If you want to learn a new skill, you have to deliberately engage in learning, which creates plastic changes in our brain. Watch your kids, right? They're like little babies, growing up, and they're trying to figure out their environment. And that's a stressful situation. And the brain and the body use that to kind of coordinate themselves. So the key is you want to be able to adapt to stress. And when you adapt, you thrive. Your body and brain your brain is really an adaptation machine. It's designed to take an input and to adapt to it, to your surroundings. And so what you want to build is something I call adaptive capacity. It's the ability to adapt to more physical and mental stress with less cost. So when you exceed your capacity to adapt to stress, that's when you have physical and mental health problems.
Yeah.
From a physical standpoint, it's pretty easy to predict. It's the new year right now, people ramp up a bunch of exercise. Guess what? They get overly sore. They get delayed onset muscle soreness. They may end up with tendonitis, or they injure themselves. From a psychological perspective, if you have too much stress for a long period of time, I call it the low-grade fever of stress, and you're not able to adapt to it, then you begin to break down. You get sick, you could get injured, and in the worst case scenarios, some type of pathology, you could end up passing away. So that's, stress is necessary. but the key is how do I build more capacity for it?
And so that's definitely where I want to take us next, is the different aspects of our routines, habits, pillars, concepts that can help us build that capacity. And it also makes me think of, and I'm curious if this is true in your experience, that when we engage into a stress, something's coming up and our system is going to adapt. There's like a healthy way to engage into that. And then there's like layers on top of it where we're just adding more, typically probably like mental baggage, like a psychology on top of it that has a lot of fear and anxiety. Like you can do the same thing, but one has a lot more weight to it that's like unnecessary relative to what's required to actually perform, et cetera. And that actually makes it harder to adapt. It's like you can put the foot on the gas in two ways. And like in one scenario, it's like the healthy acceleration. And the other one, you like slammed on it so much that it doesn't actually make it go faster, but it hurts like the car itself. And
yes,
you know what I'm trying to say? So can you maybe talk about that? Then we'll get into the pillars. Because I think it's like the process of the stress as well as the capacity for it.
Man, I've never had anybody ask me this question. This is a great question. So I don't know if you've ever used any type of wearable device, but a lot of times these devices, these apps now have readiness scores, right? Well, what does that mean? It's the way I look at it is it's an adaptability score. It's like, how adaptable am I to stress today? And if you can control it, because I think I mentioned to you before, like you can't manage stress. Like nobody could manage the pandemic, right? Like nobody had the choice of, I just want to turn this off, right? No, you didn't. Nobody has a choice over, we're heading into an election cycle. That's going to be a lot of fun, right? The economy, whatever. I can't manage those things. The things that I can manage, the inputs of exercise, the inputs of certain types of psychological stressors, the food that I'm nourishing my body with. So there are ways to sleep, to recover, that I can actually create more adaptive reserves. Okay. And then choose the things that I'm putting into the system. And so the body every day has a certain level of adaptable capability. So imagine like I've got a Yeti here. That Yeti is filled to water with the top. And that is how much adaptive reserves I have. Well, there's like holes in the bottom of this cup. And every day, certain things drain your adaptive reserves. Let's say you had a great night of sleep last night. You ate awesome food and you had a nice walk yesterday in the sun and you're with your family and everything's great. You wake up the next morning, man, your tank is full. Let's say we got kids. I got 3 of them. One didn't have a great night of sleep last night. And like yesterday, my car is parked in front of my house and somebody hit my car yesterday. Like how awesome is that, right? That's true, by the way.
Wow.
And so, okay, that kind of a little bit of stress, right? You have these things. And so you're going to wake up and I don't have quite as much gas in the tank. Well, now I have to make an educated decision on how much stress I then layer on intentionally. Does that make sense?
It does.
I hope that answers your question. So you got to understand how much gas do I have in the tank? And then what's the precise dose that I'm going to intentionally take on? Or what practices can I engage in today to refill that tank in a deliberate fashion? Over time, these systems, it's like having a bowl. If all the stress I could hold or handle and adapt to was like a small little bowl and I filled it to the brim and you're like, Eric, I want you to run across the room. And I ran across, water would just be going everywhere, right?
Yeah.
It's like chaos. If I now have a bowl that's like, I can barely put both arms around. And now I pour, it's like the tank, right?
Yeah.
And I pour all the stress I can, it's like I could sprint up and down stairs and nothing's going to happen. It's a daily process that it takes longer than we'd like. But as you build more and more capacity, the same things that, physically would used to cause perturbations in your readiness or psychologically, now you have the tools to be aware of where your mind's at. You can then take action and regulate your system. You become a very robust and resilient individual.
With high capacity. And
yes.
Then you can direct that to whatever you're being called to. And I want to get into the ways to build the reserves now. I think the analogies you put out are so beautiful. And one comment I do have is I really love that idea of the bowl, and particularly the running. Like we all get the idea that you'd want to build a bigger bowl, which is your reserve. so that you just like small little things, a little water loss here or there, it doesn't matter as much because you have so much tank. And so that's what we're going to spend a lot of time on, is talking about how to get the bigger tank through the investments in the management of your daily processes and habits. But then the idea too is like, okay, so we need to move. There's stress, so we need to move into action to whatever we're doing. There's the idea of doing a jarring run and the idea of like the smooth, fast walk there. And that's what I'm trying to get at, is I almost feel like that is your psychological framework of how you approach everything. There are people who get very anxious and worked up and like fly off the rails at certain things. And I think that spills more water than if you can learn through mindfulness practices, therapy, whatever you need to do to be able to proceed with more grace and peace, but still get the same thing done. So it's like the walking itself will also preserve more of your bowl while you're building a bigger bowl. So I know we're really extending this analogy, but I think it's very true.
No, I'm with you. I call this mental fitness.
Yeah.
A mentally fit person, we could start with that first pillar if you want to.
Sure, let's do it.
But a mentally fit person mental fitness is the ability to be present and to process information without bias, which empowers you to respond quickly and rationally to changing circumstances through actions anchored in your values.
Yep.
Okay, so let's think about this. You can be consciously present. You're in the moment. Information's coming at you all the time. You can process it without some type of bias. And then you can respond in a rational manner anchored in your values. So the worst thing that can happen is like you get in an argument, or your child says something, you snap back and you're like, oh, that's not me. That's not who I am. That's not, okay. Why? Well, you need to improve your mental fitness. Okay. Just like we train our physical fitness, you need to improve your mental fitness. One of the best ways to do that, this is one of our pillars, mental fitness, is through mindfulness practice, which you alluded to earlier. I think we talked earlier, like when I was at the University of Kentucky, we did one of the first studies with Headspace on mindfulness with athletes. This is like 2012, 13, somewhere around there. And we were looking at like how mindfulness impacted cortisol levels. And what we found was like some crazy stuff. Like there was one athlete we had that could not gain weight, just could not gain weight. And come to find out, he was a ruminator, meaning he would go to dinner with his girlfriend and somebody would say something to him and it bothered him and he would just gnaw at him for like days, right? So if you're listening to this, you could be like virtually raising your hand right now. That's me. And so we introduced mindfulness to him after just a very brief period of time of training mindfulness. Which mindfulness does is it just makes you aware of the present moment. As my friend, Dr. Peter Haberl says, you're training your attention, and attention is the currency of performance.
Yeah.
What every elite athlete or mom or dad wants is to have control of their attention, right? So that you can respond and act in a way that you like. Well, this guy did this for, I don't know, it was like 8 weeks. He ended up putting on like 10 pounds.
Nice.
Why? Because nothing changed, but his regulatory systems now went into balance. And guess what? His tank got bigger. And his body could then use resources that it was mobilizing for stress to then build tissue and to adapt. Yeah. So mindfulness is an excellent way to improve mental fitness. Breath work. There's different types of breath work that can impact your autonomic nervous system. The interesting thing, there's just kind of a crossover. So like you could do breath work to calm you down.
Yep.
You could do breath work for focus, like box breathing. You can do breath work to actually heighten your arousal. But there's kind of this dual benefit of doing breath work, is it's mindful in nature because you're having to focus your attention on your breath. Prayer is an excellent way to improve mental fitness. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but that is definitely one of the key pillars to building more capacity, is to train your mind so that you're aware of what's coming at you. You're aware of where your headspace is at. And if you're like, I'm a ruminator, I'll just be honest. When I notice that my brain is chasing the rabbit, then I kind of, okay. I go through a minute or two of breathing, bring myself back, and I'm right back on track. Over time, this significantly improves your capacity to handle physical and psychological stress because there's a crossover adaptation. You want to move on to another pillar?
I do. And I mean, I just relate to that so deeply. I mean, I've got into mindfulness and meditation and prayer practice intensely over the last half decade, and it's completely rewired how I relate to everything in a way that I have so much more capacity. Like, I think it was interesting. There's a study about like meditators, how they have so much lower startle responses. So meditators, when they, smack loud noise, everyone else jumps and they don't. And I think it's neurologically, they're just tuned in to becoming present and accepting of all things and not having the startle response, which is, you could say, is almost like the aberrant version of the stress response a little bit.
That is a really cool anecdote. I've never heard that. I just wrote that down on my notes. Always learning.
Hey, it's Dr. Ray. I want to quickly pause this episode to thank you so much for listening to this Fit Mother Project podcast. When I started the Fit Mother Project, I had no idea this podcast and this mission would become so impactful, so fun, and so amazing for so many ladies. And I just wanted to pause to give you some gratitude and thank you for being here. I mean it when I say that I'm so grateful to be in your life and to be helping you and your family live healthier and give you all this amazing information. So from my heart to yours, deepest thanks.
The next one I would say is sleep. We all hear about sleep all the time. That was my doctoral work. I wanted to understand how sleep impacted our ability to adapt to stress. We were actually able to measure something called direct current potential of the brain, which is kind of like, think of it as the battery of the brain, and it actually has a millivolt potential.
Yeah.
And we could see how sleep impacted that, which impacted our ability to adapt to stress. Couple things about sleep. Sleep is directly related to your immune system response. Sure. So during the day, these stress systems are turned up, which is fine, right? You got to respond to your environment. Well, at nighttime, these systems are supposed to dial down, which then allows your immune system to kind of kick into action. And actually, you create what's called long-term immunological memory during this period of time. It's really interesting. Your body has the capability of remembering foreign invaders that came in, right? So it can then neutralize them later. If people hear about cortisol, like, I need to regulate my cortisol, mindfulness will help getting adequate sleep, restful and fulfilling sleep.
Yep.
Testosterone for men, especially, most of your testosterone is released during later stages of REM sleep.
Yep.
Fragmented, especially older men, you can actually predict their waking testosterone levels by looking at sleep fragmentation. And if you sleep deprive yourself to like less than 5 hours a week, it's like reducing your total testosterone by 10 to 15%.
Can you explain that? The less than 5 hours a week, what does that mean?
So if I were to sleep less than 5 hours a night, over a week, you're like, yeah, that, of course, if you didn't sleep 5 hours in a week, if I slept for 5 hours a night for a week, my testosterone level would drop about 10 to 15%.
Yeah.
After 30, males, typically their testosterone level decreases about 1% per year. You can mitigate that with strength training and other things, lower the decrement. But if you think about that, you're like aging yourself a decade in testosterone through sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
So a lot of guys, start thinking about testosterone replacement where really they just need to get their sleep back online.
For sure.
Hunger, your hunger hormones, leptin and ghrelin, are regulated by sleep. So people that are sleep deprived less than 7 hours a night can eat about almost 400 extra calories a day.
Yeah.
So your self-control is thrown for a loop. I think one of the biggest ones, we talk about mental health, something that's very concerning to me, and I actually have a traumatic brain injury from my football days, is brain health.
Yeah.
We now know that the brain doesn't have a traditional lymphatic system. It has something called a glymphatic system, which is basically upregulated when we sleep at night, which means that your brain kind of flushes all these metabolic toxins out, of which a number of these are associated with neurodegenerative diseases. So there's a lot of stuff that happens during sleep. The key thing is like, and I'll just say this right here. What should you pay attention to?
Yeah.
These devices like the Apple Watch, the Oura Ring, the Whoop, when it says like deep and REM sleep, that data is completely invalid. If you go to our website, we actually created a blog. If you Google accuracy of wearable technology, AIM7 shows up like number 1 or number 2 next to the NIH. We have this ongoing, we're device agnostic. We love wearables, or else we wouldn't exist. But we want you to know like what's real and what's not.
Mm-hmm.
But deep and REM sleep, you cannot measure those accurately yet with wrist-worn actigraphy and HRV.
Yeah.
You would need something called polysomnography.
Yeah.
So the only things you should really be focusing on is duration, onset, when I go to sleep, and how consistent my sleep is. So onset is something that's really interesting. A lot of people are like, well, does it really matter if I go to bed at 1 and wake up at 9 versus 10 and 6? Is that 8 hours the same? It is not. There was a paper, I got to find this. It was with like several 100,000 people out of the UK Biobank. They used 23andMe data. They looked at wearable data, sleep journals. It was in a very extensive sleep study. And what they found was this: when you go to bed is directly related to your risk of major depression. And so if you were to shift, let's say you went to bed at midnight and you shifted it back, you shifted your sleep back 1 hour. Every 1 hour shift backwards decreased your risk of major depression by almost 20%.
Wow.
Yeah. And then if they shifted it back 2 hours, it was almost 40%. And then the researchers is really interesting. They're like, why is this, right? Okay. It's like, okay, we're seeing this trend, but why is it that if I go to bed earlier and I wake up earlier, that I have less risk of depression? It all goes back to one thing. The way that there's two things that regulate sleep. There's a homeostatic drive and there's a circadian aspect to this. Well, your circadian clock is anchored by sunlight.
Yes.
So people that go to bed earlier and wake up earlier get more natural sunlight exposure, which directly impacts, when you see sunlight in the morning, it sets off a cascade of hormonal and neurological events that directly impact your mood and risk of depression.
Yes.
So just getting outside, you're in a beautiful part of the country for a few minutes every morning. Even if it's cold, just bundle up and go outside, stand on your porch, drink your coffee, anchor your circadian clock. So I'm not going to go down this rabbit hole anymore unless you want me to, but sleep, mental fitness, exercise. I think exercise is one of these things that like we hear a lot about, but there is what's called a cross-stressor adaptation, which means that physical exercise. So here's the cool thing about exercise. When you exercise, you are deliberately turning on the stress systems and turning them off.
Yeah.
So your body gets good at kind of flipping this switch. And so there is a cross-stressor adaptation to psychological stress resilience. There's some really cool things about like aerobic exercise and BDNF, which helps with memory. It also helps with brain health. But the three kind of things you really want to focus on is how much you're walking every day. A great paper just came out. The 10,000 steps rule. It's not too far off. It's kind of like 8,800 steps is where we start to see like kind of this precipitous drop off of risk of cardiovascular disease, lowering your risk of all-cause mortality.
Yep.
Something called moderate to vigorous physical activity. I'm sure you guys talk about this a lot.
We're no strangers to that.
Yeah. And then resistance training. Like everybody needs to resistance train. There was a really cool paper that showed that if you hit your 150 to 300 minutes and you do at least 2 total body strengthening sessions a week, you lower your risk of all-cause mortality by 47%. Like these are not like people are like, let's go do a cold plunge in a sauna. I'm like, yeah, that's great. But that's like a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percent. Like just go walk more, lift heavy stuff and get your heart rate up.
100%.
And you can do all of this while outside.
Yes.
You know what I'm saying? If you needed to, because I'm a busy parent. My wife, we got 3 kids. My wife's a physical therapist. Like we have to sneak it in. We have to figure out a way to get it done. And so we do stuff with our kids. We go walking with our kids. But like it's really not that complicated. Two more real quick. One is nutrition, without getting into like extremes on any side of this equation. I have friends that are vegan. I have friends that are carnivore, whatever.
Yep.
The literature is pretty clear, like something closer to the end of something like a Mediterranean anti-inflammatory diet.
For sure. That's what ours is much like. Yeah.
Yeah. Just multicolored fruits and vegetables, protein, healthy fats. You're just setting your body up for, you're reducing systemic inflammation. You're fueling yourself adequately. And I just kind of want to double click on this last one for a little bit longer. Community. This is like, we are getting so much valuable research now, unfortunately, because of COVID. There was a paper out of the British Psychological Society that showed that people that had greater connectedness during lockdown periods had less worry and fatigue, lower perceived levels of stress. It was as if like this connectivity acted as a buffer against physical and psychological stress. There was a paper that came out of the University of Kansas, I don't know, 6-9 months ago that showed just one meaningful conversation a day significantly lowered stress, boosted your mood. Here's the kicker though. Electronic forms were not effective. You actually have to connect with somebody in real life.
Yeah.
And then the last one, and you alluded to it earlier, like kind of your prayer practice, is faith communities. I'm not going to go into the rabbit hole of like, I just think that, people kind of dismiss this stuff. And there was a paper with 5,400 people over 18 years. So I started looking into, you can go down this rabbit hole, look up allostatic load sometime. Yeah. And I was doing a bunch of research on like how to build and enhance our ability to handle stress. And I ran across this paper and it was like people that were regularly engaged in a faith community had a 55% reduction in all-cause mortality. Now, what is it about a faith community that's like can be very beneficial? Well, one, typically like you have friends and you share your burdens with your friends.
Yeah.
And then the other two is acknowledging that, you know what, I'm not the center of the universe and maybe there's something bigger than me.
Yes.
My faith, I have a Christian faith, but my point is like, we intentionally moved back to Houston because of this group of people that we love doing life with and we can go through hard stuff with. We need each other. So if you're living in community with folks, if you're getting an adequate amount of sleep, and look, if you have kids, we know there's going to be seasons in life. So nothing's ever going to be perfect. If you got some way of doing something for your mental health and fitness, if you can control 80% of the time what goes into your body and you're fueling yourself, you're exercising at a pretty frequent interval, you're going to be very adaptive to stress.
For sure. Well said. I mean, that's definitely a masterclass in the totality of what it takes for a well, resilient human. And I know that the people listening to this are going to be nodding their heads and be like, yup, this is what we're doing with Fit Father and Fit Mother lifestyle. And so now you have a deeper cut about why this all ties into your overall stress resilience. A couple of kind of poetic thoughts that came to my mind is when you were sharing about the one meaningful conversation during the COVID times, that seemed to be like a buffer or like to create this protective barrier and create resilience through connection. It made me realize that our nervous system is both personal and transpersonal in the sense that literally you are, through your connection emotionally with someone outside of your direct nervous system, you're borrowing, creating this additive synergistic property that I think is so like poetic, let alone the faith community, which I think is the same thing. It's not only just like the friendships and the relationship, but your nervous system, it can shift into this resilient, connected, less fearful and isolated. I think the domains, at least we'll talk a little bit in the spiritual realm, of love and fear is a duality that like it plays out in most major religions. And I think the love can be mirrored in a resilient nervous system that has someone that feels open, connected, that there's strength beyond exact understanding, that I don't have to do this on my own. And there's a softness to that kind of strength. Whereas the fear is a contracted, tense, typically I'm on my own and I need to fight. And there's a lot of unknowns. I mean, that's naturally going to orient the system in a way that it's contracted, not expansive. And we are here with one another to help create more of this generative balance. And we can, like, we all, as much as we do have a bunch of crap going on in the world, like, we all could imagine the hypothetical world that is driven predominantly through the energy of love and what that would do to ourselves as beings, but also as the structures we create as civilization. And it all is so fractal. It like starts with our own nervous system and is mirrored out in our actual systems of civilization. And then ultimately, perhaps even our relationship to the cosmos, to God, to the universe, to all of this. So it's really cool. Like, I mean, I just want to go there. And I think that's, I don't know if that resonates with you.
It does. It resonates a lot. You got me deeply thinking. It's hard for me to stay focused right now because my mind's thinking about, this is a pretty profound statement. I just think there's something about sharing your burdens with other people and being open to that. And it allows you just to kind of, you ever heard some guy talking, some comedian, he's like, how many guys do you know that want to say they need a good cry? Not a lot.
Yeah.
But you know what? Like, in essence, we do. We just all need it in a different way.
Yeah.
And when you do that and you can talk to somebody about what's happening, a friend, maybe you need to see a counselor, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, open up. It's going to relieve. It's like taking a pressure valve and just like relieving that pressure valve.
Yeah.
So
true.
Yeah.
I have one thing I want to talk about before we transition the back part of this conversation. I want to go into how AIM7 helps people take the inputs of data and then make actionable decisions in terms of what to do. So in all these inputs, whatever you're feeding into your data set, and then, okay, today, this is what we're seeing in the picture. Maybe not do this high intensity exercise, maybe do this more restorative thing. Before we get there, can we talk a little bit about dopamine? I think that's a conversation we're going to hear more about, especially because I believe that a big reason why humans are likely less resilient today is because, one, we're outside and we're less circadian rhythm balanced as we used to. And then two, we have these phones and our screen time and all of this that is creating both physical and low-level psychological stress by taxing this neurochemical dopamine reward system that is inherently deeply tied to the nervous system and our ability to have a reservoir. Like, when you're depleted in this kind of dopamine system, like, you are at your worst performance. And so can we talk about that? Is that something that you get into?
Yeah. I think about it more like long-term goal pursuit. Because people feel demotivated.
Yeah.
They're just like, blah, right? So dopamine is highly related to motivation and goal pursuit. And so one of the things, my background in sports, like, we'd always talk about like process. And, we'd say, hey, we want athletes to create goals, but then we want them to understand, then reverse engineer that and understand the process that it takes to get there. Well, if you think about two runners running a race and you're running a marathon, both running a marathon, and one runner is like just solely focused on the goal. First of all, was it 26.2 miles is a marathon? First of all, I would never do that. I like biking. I hate running. I will sprint, but I will not run. It is what it is. I love hiking too, but I hate running. I don't know. So anyways, that'd be torture. If I was to just focus on the goal, I'd quit. Why? Dopamine levels would start to drop.
For sure.
However, if like I could see like the next corner, and I'm like, I just got to make it to that corner. And when I get to that corner, I then go, Eric, good job. Well done. Guess what? You actually can internally reward yourself, what increases your dopamine levels.
Yes.
And you have to do that over and over again. As an entrepreneur, I think you could agree with me that sometimes we don't do this.
Yeah. I've had long stretches of that. And it feels burnouts at the end of that, for sure.
As parents, we don't do this. We just think about final outcomes and we never actually take a moment. Like we recently raised some money, right, for AIM7 because our technology took a lot of money to get this thing off the ground. And I had 3 friends text me at the same time. What are you doing tonight to celebrate? I was like, I hadn't thought about it. So I went to my youngest son. I was like, what do you want to do? He was like, I want to eat Mexican food. I'm like, great. So we went and ate Mexican food and like just celebrated. Like he didn't even know why, but like that's not typically how I celebrate with food, but it doesn't matter. The point is like, I think that yes, the phones are zapping us. Pornography is crippling people. It's crippling kids. You get such a massive,
it depletes your neurotransmitters over time. And I mean, that's all exactly what we're talking about. And it doesn't even have to be like straight up pornography, even just the stuff the kids are looking on Instagram, which is just like a bunch of moderately acceptable naked people looking at how they look. It's brutal.
What is it? God, I saw the other day, I need to find this paper, but it was like parents that can delay getting their kids on social media, their mental health is better over time. I mean, we've always dealt with the comparison game. It was like a junior high school, right?
Yeah, for sure.
The difference is when you went home, you didn't have to compare yourself anymore.
Yep.
Now it's everywhere. And I saw Matthew McConaughey talking about this. He's like, they didn't let their son have a phone till he was 15. And he was like, I wanted my son to know if he wanted to share something in the world, make it meaningful and go share it. But don't share it because I just thought there's something like kind of beautiful about that. But, I'm by no means a neuroscientist, but my understanding of dopamine has always been around motivation and drive because my job was to keep athletes motivated. And so we always have to like every day take a look at like, what did you do? Let's acknowledge a job well done. You check the box. You did a good job. Take the next step. And that's actually something we baked into AIM7 is when people accomplish their weekly goals, we actually tell them to like take a moment and acknowledge it in a way that's very unique to them. Otherwise, you're going to quit. You just will.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's also a perfect segue now. Let's talk for the next few minutes about AIM7. If someone has been interested in this conversation so far, well, you're listening, you obviously are. Let's discuss what you developed in AIM7, kind of run us through the specs of it, how it works and what it does. And of course, if people actually want to try it, there is going to be the link associated with this wherever you're listening to this or watching this. And the code is FITFAMILY, where you get an awesome discount and ability to try this out. So get into AIM7. Let's talk about that now.
Yeah. So the big problem with wearables is it's just data, right? Like, so what if I walk 10,000 steps or slept 7 hours? Like, what do I do today? And insights aren't good enough. You got to know what to do. So we connect to your wearable device. We're iOS only. We connect to the Apple Watch, Oura Ring, Garmin, Fitbit. And if you have like an Apple and an Oura or a Garmin and Oura, we combine all of these and we do some really cool stuff in the background to kind of make these super devices. But what we then do is we also do something that's very unique. And this is part of our secret sauce, but your wearable doesn't know how you feel. And that's a big problem. So if you've ever used a device and it's like, oh, you're a 90 today. And you're like, no, I feel like crap. Well, there's a reason. So we do this really quick, short calibration in the morning, takes 20 seconds about your mood and energy. And then AIM7 gives you daily personalized recommendations for exercise, recovery, and mental fitness. So like we're going to tell you how much gas you have in the tank. We call it an A7 score. And then we're like, all right, if you are going to go do aerobic exercise, you should stay in this heart rate zone. And here's an ideal duration.
Nice.
If you're going to do a HIIT program, we have different physiological outcomes that you could do. Or if you're going to go do a HIIT class, go this long and this hard. Same thing for recovery from a sleep perspective. We also have you can input and be like, hey, I have a foam roller. Or I do have a cold plunge or a sauna. Which one do I use today and how do I use it? And then from a mental fitness perspective, we can assess your mood. So let's say you're stressed. We'll give you a breathwork tool to use right then to regulate your nervous system. Or your mood is off. We'll give you a gratitude intervention. And we do this it's like the full gamut of exercise, recovery, and mental fitness. And what we find is, people love this because they're telling you exactly what you need to do each day to look, feel, and perform better. It pairs directly with whatever program you're already doing.
Yeah.
If you don't have an exercise program, we can provide that for you in there. But we want to complement. You use Peloton. We've had Peloton recommendations in there.
Yep.
So we're like that coach in your pocket that now is going to take all that wearable data and actually make it useful, tailored to you and your specific goals, your lifestyle, your preferences.
That's amazing. I mean, I think this is kind of like, insofar as we talked about technology has damaging effects, this is such a beautiful use of it. A self-inputted feedback and advice mechanism that is dynamically flowing with you through your stress capacity, meeting you where you're at in any given day, helping take out the cognitive burden needed to figure out what is, and integrating with great platforms like ours that, it's so cool how that all works. I'm really excited that this is out there and that people get to listen to this now.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It was a 2.5-year labor of love to get it in the marketplace. There's a lot of technology, but customers, we've had people's lives literally get changed. I mean, people that were struggling with mental health issues, parents that have lost weight. I mean, just when you get the stress systems balanced out, the body can do amazing things.
Yeah.
And it's been a blessing to just be able to sit there and just watch and help.
That's a beautiful comment. And I think that I want to emphasize that in our conclusion here. Our bodies have innate intelligence to heal, to organize. I mean, it's the whole system that comes from our DNA, expresses as our tissues and structures, and can repair and remodel. Yet, when the stress system is not working properly, when the inputs are not right, the capacity is low, that ability to heal and organize is basically put on pause hold and ultimately leads to degeneration, if not reactivated. And it sounds like, well, I know that AIM7 is a great way for people to actually reactivate that and keep it tuned up on a regular basis through dynamic recommendations. So it's deep stuff.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on to share this.
Yeah, you're welcome so much. And there's going to be links, everyone, in the show notes where people can try AIM7, discount code FITFAMILY. And Dr. Erik, thanks again for your time today.
Thank you.